The president of the Algerian Economic Renewal Council, Kamal Moula, has affirmed that the president of the Republic has taken important decisions in favor of economic operators. And in Libya, the death toll in Darna flooding could reach 20,000 and thousands remain missing as rescuers struggle to get to Darna. And the Geneva Support Group for Western Sahara has suspended the presidency of the United Nations Human Rights Council regarding the continued violation of international humanitarian law by Moroccan occupying power in Western Sahara. And those were the major developments. Now, the full news edition. Good afternoon. The president of the Algerian Economic Renewal Council, Kamal Moula, has affirmed that the president of the Republic has taken important decisions in favor of economic operators.
I would like to
thank the President of the Republic for this meeting, which was very important and which comes after the reports we have submitted to him. This meeting was important because it allowed us to address several issues encountered by some companies. The President of the Republic has taken important decisions that will relieve economic operators and solve their problems. The Algerian Council for Economic Renewal remains today and forever at the service of the country, the economy, and the people.
And this came following his meeting with the President of the Republic in the presence of other government officials. The Minister of Foreign Affairs and the National Community Abroad, Ahmed Attaf, has discussed with his Italian counterpart, Antonio Tajani, the current situation in the Sahel region. In a telephone conversation, Mr. Attaf informed his Italian counterpart of the initiative of the President of the Republic for a political settlement of the crisis in Niger. And the Italian Minister, for his part, reiterated his country's support for a political solution to the crisis, emphasizing the importance of holding an international conference on development in the Sahel region. The deterioration of the situation in Mali was also at the center of the exchanges between the two ministers, who agreed on the importance of a rapid relaunch of the implementation of the agreement on peace and reconciliation in Mali resulting from the Algiers process. The two officials also discussed the issue of the sharp increase of illegal migration in the Mediterranean Sea. And the United States Ambassador to Algiers, Elizabeth Moore Owen, has shed light on the strong relations linking her country and Algeria, stressing that the launching of a direct route between Algiers and New York will strengthen bilateral economic relations. Following her meeting with the Algerian president, the U.S. ambassador said the meeting was an opportunity to discuss ways and means to restore security and stability in the region and to inform the president of the Republic of the U.S. gratitude for Algeria's efforts to support her neighboring countries, notably amid the disasters that caused thousands of victims. The U.S. diplomat stressed that her country is ready to work together with Algeria during its mandate as a member of the UN Security Council and the Human Rights Council. The meeting also made it possible to discuss bilateral economic relations, stressing that the launching of a direct route between Algiers and New York will strengthen economic relations, tourism, and cultural relations. You're still listening to Radio Algeria International, 14 hours 34 minutes Algiers time. The chairman of the Shura Council of the Sultanate of Oman, Sheikh Khalid bin Hilal bin Nasser al-Mauli, is on an official visit to Algeria starting today at the invitation of the Speaker of the National People's Assembly, Brahim Boughali. The visit, which will last until next Tuesday, will be an opportunity to consolidate relations of friendship and brotherliness, relations linking the two countries, and to examine ways and means of strengthening cooperation in various fields, particularly at the parliamentary level. And Libya's Minister of Transport in the Government of National Unity, Mohammed Salem Shahoubi, expressed his gratitude to the people and leaders of Algeria for the support offered to his country following the floods that affected many towns, killing hundreds of people. Jama Salmani has more.
Speaking at the end of a meeting granted by the President of the Libyan Presidential Council, Mohammed Yunus al-Menfi, the Interior Minister Brahim Marad, in the presence of the Minister of Health, Abdelhaq Saihi, the Minister of National Solidarity, Kautar Krikou, and the President of the Algerian Red Crescent, Ibtissam Hamlawi, Mr. Al-Shahoubi thanked the leaders, the government and the people of Algeria for their support for the Libyan people, recalling the arrival of a fleet of aircraft carrying, among other things, fully equipped rescue teams. Mr. Al-Shahoubi said the Algerian people, government and leaders have always been there to help their Libyan brothers, saying that Libya considers Algeria to be a great sister because of their shared destiny.
We welcome today the Algerian government delegation that has come to show solidarity with the Libyan people in this ordeal. History is repeating itself. We remember the participation of the Libyan people alongside their Algerian brothers during the Liberation War, and it is not strange for the Algerian people and the Algerian government to help their Libyan brothers. We consider Algeria as our elder brother since we share the same destiny. The Government of National Unity thanks the Algerian authorities and the Algerian people for all the aid they provided.
For his part, Mr. Marad said that they had to be there on the instructions of the President of the Republic, who has sent them as a ministerial delegation to present his condolences to the President, the government and the people of Libya. He added that the President of the Republic was ready to help them further if the need arises at the request of the Libyan brothers.
Meanwhile, the President of the National People's Assembly, Brahim Boughali, has sent a message of condolence and compassion to the Speaker of the Libyan Parliament, or House of Representatives, Mr. Aguila Salah, following the deadly floods which hit several regions of Libya. Mr. Boughali, in his message, has expressed great sadness and grief about the news of the torrential rains and the floods that have hit several regions of the sister state of Libya, resulting in a number of deaths and injuries. He extended on behalf of all members of the National People's Assembly his sincere condolences and deepest feelings of compassion. And still with Libya, the death toll in Derna flooding could reach 20,000 and thousands remain missing as rescuers struggle to get to Derna, the city hardest hit by the floods. James El-Manigan.
Residents of the devastated Libyan city of Derna desperately searched for missing relatives as rescue workers appealed for more body bags after a catastrophic flood that killed thousands of people and swept many out to sea. Swaths of the Mediterranean Sea were obliterated by a torrent of water unleashed by a powerful storm that swept down a usually dry riverbed on Sunday night, bursting dams above the city. Multi-story buildings collapsed with sleeping families inside. Spokesperson of the Libyan Interior Ministry said that 3,840 deaths had been recorded in Derna so far, including 3,190 who have already been buried. Among them were at least 400 foreigners, mostly from Sudan and Egypt. Derna Mayor Abdelmoumen Al-Ghaithi said the estimated number of deaths in the city could reach between 18,000 to 20,000 based on the number of districts destroyed by the flood. Meanwhile, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, said he was deeply upset by the death of thousands of people in Libya following floods caused by Storm Danielle, which recently hit the east of this country, and presented his deepest condolences to the Libyan people. He said Storm Danielle is another deadly reminder of the catastrophic impact that climate change can have on our world. He added that human rights must be at the center of the response to this heartbreaking situation and that the international community should invest in prevention and resilience.
14 hours, 39 minutes, Algiers time. You're still listening to Radio Algeria International. And the Minister of Foreign Affairs and National Community Abroad, Ahmed Attaf, has received the personal envoy for Western Sahara, Staffan de Mistura, who is on a working visit to Algeria.
Mr. Attaf reiterated Algeria's full support for the efforts made by the UN Secretary-General for Western Sahara, Antonio Guterres, and his personal envoy, Staffan de Mistura, expressing his hope that these efforts would result in the resumption of direct negotiations between the parties to the conflict, namely the Kingdom of Morocco and the Polisario Front, without conditions and in good faith, aimed at reaching a political solution and preserving the right of the Sahrawi people to self-determination. The minister also held the unchanged position of the Security Council, which considers the question of Western Sahara to be a question of decolonization, the handling of which is governed by the activation of one of the United Nations system, namely the right of peoples to self-determination. As a reminder, the visit is part of the tour by the Secretary General's personal envoy to the region since the beginning of September, when he first visited the occupied Sahrawi territories and then held separate talks with the two parties to the conflict, namely the Kingdom of Morocco and the Polisario Front.
14 hours 40 minutes Algiers time. You're still listening to Radio Algeria International. The Geneva Support Group for Western Sahara has suspended the presidency of the United Nations Human Rights Council regarding the continued violation of international humanitarian law and human rights by the occupying power in Western Sahara, the Kingdom of Morocco, in a systematic and widespread manner. The Geneva Support Group for Western Sahara reminded of the siege imposed on the occupied Western Sahara by the occupying force, according to what was stated in the statement of the Secretary General of the United Nations regarding the inability of the Office of the High Commissioner to carry out any action visits to Western Sahara for the 8th year in a row in light of the increasing cases of preventing international human rights defenders and journalists from entering the occupied territory. You're still listening to Radio Algeria International, and in Morocco, at least 29 or more than 2,900 people have been killed and more than 5,500 injured in the country's deadliest earthquake since 1960. Almost 3,000 people are reported to have died in the earthquake that hit Morocco on Friday, but the death toll continues to rise as search and rescue teams comb through mountains of rubble. And North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is continuing his tour of eastern Russia after his summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Russian President has accepted an invitation from Kim Jong-un to visit North Korea after two leaders held their first face-to-face summit in 4 years. Kim is in Russia's Far East as President Putin looks to reinforce alliances amid Russia's ongoing conflict in Ukraine and as the North Korean leader continues to advance his country's military modernization. And back to the country now, 15 partnership conventions between Algerian and Chinese companies have been signed at the closing ceremony of a businessman meeting in Oran province. The signed conventions pertain to the sectors of construction, telecommunication, subcontracting, electricity, pharmaceutical industries, and transformation. 14 hours 43 minutes Algiers time. You're still listening to Radio Algeria International, and time now for the headlines. The president of the Algerian Economic Renewal Council, Kamal Moula, has affirmed that the president of the Republic had taken important decisions in favor of economic operators. And in Libya, the death toll in Derna flooding could reach 20,000 and thousands remain missing as rescuers struggle to get to Derna, the city hardest hit by the floods. And the Geneva Support Group for Western Sahara has suspended the presidency of the United Nations Human Rights Council regarding the continued violation of international humanitarian law by the Moroccan occupying power in Western Sahara. And that's it, dear listeners, for our news bulletin. I invite you now to listen to the international event of the week presented by Mohammed Khatel.
The international event of the week.
The Indian capital, New Delhi, hosted this week the 18th summit meeting of the Group of 20, or G20, bringing together the member states of the 7 most industrialized countries, or G7, and developing countries. The New Delhi meeting is the culmination of the G20 process and meetings aimed at addressing global economic challenges. The group, set up in 1999 in the aftermath of the Asian financial crisis, was designed to create a dialogue between the members of the G7 and the major economic powers. It emerged during the 28th financial crisis as an institution that facilitated cooperation between the central banks and finance ministers of its member countries. Asked about how crucial this year's G20 meeting is for Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who has strived over the past years to demonstrate that India is a global power, our political analyst Hamoud Salhi had this to say.
We have to distinguish between the narrative and the reality of the international order. Certainly, India has played a major role in promoting a view from the South, the need for the advanced countries to look at seriously at issues of climate, at issues of trade, the IMF loans. These are all very, very important issues. But from a practical position, the Western countries or the North still is holding to the orders, to the rules that are in fact detrimental to the development of many third world countries. The World Bank, for example, and the IMF, for that matter, conditions that are heavy and designed to create dependence relationships of the South on the North are still the same. They have not changed. So from that perspective, India's message is clear. But at this point, this idea of bridging the gap between the rich and the poor, or the advanced countries and the less advanced countries, has been an issue that has been here for a long time, and perhaps since the Indian Prime Minister back in 2009, when he said that the G20 would create a new international order. At that time, the goal was to narrow the gap between the North and the South. But years later, that issue remains the same. It has not changed. Certainly, India's role in contributing to the debate, particularly from the narrative perspective, is worth examining, and it has had some impact in the media as the issues are raised again and again. But in terms of practicality, we're still a long ways from reaching that.
The G20 meeting's agenda focused on a series of issues of interest to emerging countries, including climate financing and food security, as well as multilateral development bank reforms, trade and investment, and digital transition. In this respect, India proposed to include the African Union in the G20, a move reflecting its willingness to support developing countries. Asked on whether India's declared objective to bridge the gap between the developed and developing countries was likely to be fulfilled in an attempt to include the Global South in the world's decision-making, our political analyst Hamoud Salhi had the following.
India-China border dispute is linked also to other variable, meaning that the two countries see themselves as economic powers, and because of their strategic interest that tends to converge in certain areas, along with the United States strengthening a relationship with India with the goal of using that relationship against China, appear to be detrimental to the functioning or the realization of the G20 goal, which is to be a dominant power. The fact that China and India are in conflict and don't see eye to eye on many issues in global politics, not because of their vision or their vision of the international order, because both China and India were key players in introducing the idea or contributing to the idea of non-alignment. The Afro-Asian group was both India and China were two key players in pushing that agenda. Today, the relationships are different, in part because of the ongoing dispute, border dispute and others, but more so because of differences over international order. India's leaning towards the United States and building relationships with the United States, it seems to suggest to China that India is siding with the United States against their strategic interests. Considering the border conflict and the strategic difference that exists between the two, that perception in the Chinese eye is warranted and could be a strong test for the G20 to continue as a strong, united power. Unfortunately, the lack of unity and the lack of finding solution to the dispute between India and China are at the present time more of a problem and are indication that the G20 is leaning towards more fragmentation, less impactful in international order than its strategic goal back of the 2009 would have had set for it to achieve.
This year's G20 summit meeting was marked by the tense relations between the two Asian major powers, namely China and India, which became this year the world's most populated country. The International Monetary Fund expects the Asia-Pacific region's gross domestic product, GDP, to increase to reach 4.6% in 2023. It expects China, the second world economic power, to contribute by about 35% of the global growth against 15% and 14% for India and the Americas successfully. Asked if the global economic prospects would not be overshadowed by the existing rivalries between the two Asian giants, namely China and India, notably on account of their ongoing border dispute, our political analyst Hamoud Salhi commented the issue.
This meeting is extremely important to the Prime Minister because it's a unique opportunity for India to present itself as a global influential power, and that India did very well up to this now. But in addition to that, the Prime Minister may have other reasons to place such a high importance to these G20 meetings. In particular, with the parliamentarian elections scheduled for next June, the Prime Minister could also be thinking about using this meeting, the G20 meeting in New Delhi, to maintain his leads in the poll and to eventually win the election as his party leader. Now, we know that Modi, the Prime Minister, has always prioritized India's domestic interest over international. He is perceived as a controversial nationalist leader who will do everything in favor of India. But the Premier may have concern that his anti-Muslim agendas and policies against the Muslims in India, along with the alleged favoritism towards his party, which received allegedly 3 times more funding from the government than the opposition. All of this, Modi must be thinking that combined together, this could weaken his party's chances to win the next upcoming elections. Modi's fear is that a perceived failure of his tenure in foreign policy could potentially put his candidacy at risk, but he could use it to his advantage as well. Hence, we saw him doubling down on his opposition to China in Johannesburg last month, warning through his foreign minister against the expansion of BRICS. This was to help him project himself as a leader willing to stand against China, with whom India has had territorial dispute. Similarly, after his stand against the expansion of BRICS to members of the Global South in Johannesburg, India's Prime Minister has continued to push the image of himself as a leader of the Global South and in favor of granting the continent of Africa a full membership in the G20. It's too soon to know whether this strategy will work in the coming elections, But judging from earlier reports, the Prime Minister has succeeded in maintaining Global South, a catchy phrase in India. The problem, however, remains. There are no guarantees that the expansion of the term Global South will not hurt Moody's chances. But we know for sure is that the Prime Minister appears to be fully aware of how crucial to use the G20 meeting for his candidacy and to project India as a global power.
It is worth recalling that the G20 countries that account for nearly the third of the global population represent 75% of global trade and 85% of the world's GDP.
The Shabi was made famous in the 60s by late Al-Hajj Muhammad Al-Anqa. The songs are generally a call and response from a soloist to whom a small chorus answers. Shabi songs are expressed with the qasida or poetry and musically points to the direction of the Arabo-Andalusian music. The Shabi is built on the alternation of the verse-refrain and its poetic set of themes often directed towards social criticism or satire has changed course into approaching different topics. In all cases, simplicity is the best element of Shabi. Nowadays, the singers of Shabi are numerous and their notoriety depends on the care which they take to choose the poetry and the music. One of these music Shabi players is Ammar Al-Ashab. Ammar Al-Ashab is one of these Shabi singers. He was born on July 31st, 1932 in Algiers. He was one of the leading Shabi composers and performers in Algiers during the 50s and 60s. He immigrated to France in 1976. Ammar Al-Ashab is a well-cultured musician that plays a Shabi close to the Arabo-Andalusian spirit, but also capable of bringing it with playful easiness near the popular form. His sphere of activity is thus broader. An uncontested master, he owes his success to his very strong musical temperament and his direction of the tempo. The richest parts of this live recording are the various improvised interludes, such as the ones in the Zidane mode and the Mawel mode. During a concert, these interludes serve the purpose of allowing the singer and musicians to show off his vocal ornamentation and improvisational skills, and Al-Ashab's throaty improvisations are superb. This is the real desert or Arab blues, the Shabi sounds that's been the music of the working classes and poor across North Africa for almost a century. Vocalist and mandolin player Ammar Al-Ashab gives a rendition of the music, albeit in a modern, though not pop fashion. His ensemble employs piano and banjo, among other traditional instruments. Apart from his own compositions, much of the material is traditional. One can also listen to a very full sound on the uniquely Arabic songs like Gulu Yamna, where mandolin, guitar, and violin were combined to give a wonderful sound. And using banjo as opposed to the more expected oud proves to be inspired with a not immediately identifiable twang. On piano, Mustafa Yaqub is used sparingly but to interesting effect on Al-Gumri. And Al-Ashab himself proves to be a master of mandolin on the same track.